Today's daf is daf Mem Zayin, and we're discussing a case of a cow that was pregnant and attacked a shore. And the Mishnah had established that you collect chatzi nezek from the para and a revia nezek from the vlad, because there's a suffix, maybe the vlad was not yet born at the time of the attack, and therefore both the para, the mother, and the vlad are responsible for this attack. And the Gemara had mentioned in the name of Abaye on Daf Mem Vavam and Beis that it really means, how could it mean that you collect half plus another quarter? That's more than Chatzi Nezek, and a short time only pays Chatzi Nezek. So Abaye reinterprets it that Chatzi Para, Chatzi Nezek for the Para really means 1/4, and 1/4 of the Vlad means 1/8, and Rava rejected that because Rava says it says half and a quarter. It doesn't say anything about an eighth or a quarter. And therefore, Rava reinterprets the Mishnah, and again, we're talking about a Vlad inside a para. We don't know if the para gave birth before the attack or after the attack. And the Mishnah is telling us that if the para is alive and well in front of us, then the nizak has recourse to collect his entire chatzi nezek from the para. But lesel para on the top of Daf Mem Zayin, if the para is not around and not available, then mishtali revia nezek min avlad. Then basically he could collect the nizak from the vlad. He would normally collect chatzi nezek, but since we don't know if the vlad was definitely part of the attack, therefore we'll apply the principle of sumchus momen amuto b'safik cholkin, and half of a half is a quarter. And the Gemara is now medayik from Rava that the reason why you collect from the vlad only reva nezek is because lo yadinon ihavi vlad bahador ki nilcha, was the para still pregnant at the time of the attack? Ilo havi, or maybe the vlad was born before the attack. Avol ipshitolon dahavi vlad bahador. If we would have certain evidence to conclude that the vlad was not born before the negicha, but rather it was inside the para at the time of the negicha, then mishtalim kulei chatzi nezek min vlad. The nizak can collect the entire fee of chatzi nezek from the vlad. And that means that the vlad is considered what's called yerech imo. We have a principle called uber yerech imo, and we see the vlad as part of the mother's body, and therefore the entire chatzi nezek is collectible from the vlad. Rava l'tamei dama Rava parashi zika gova mivlod. That if a pregnant cow damages something, the nizak can collect from the vlad. My timer, gufahi. We view, as we said before, the vlad as part and extension of the guf of the mother, and that's called uber yerech imo. Now, on this, we have a long discussion here in Tosfos. Dira maschil my timer gufahi, because Tosfos proves from other sugyas in Tvura and in Sanhedrin that we might derive the same conclusion that Umer Dierech Imo from the fact that a Vlada Nirvas Manogachas Asur Vlada. But Tosfos says that that Gemara is not a full proof to prove that Uber Yerech Imo, because it could be that the Nirvas includes the Vlad. The Vlad is like part and parcel of the Maisa Revia and gets Hanoah from the Revia. Or in the case of the Negicha, the Vlad is part of the Negicha, even if Uber Lav Yerech Imo. Then Tosfos goes on to quote a Gemara in Chulin to prove that Rava holds Uber Lav Yerech Imo. Because Rava says, Hashochet es hatrefa, Matzah ben tes chai, the mutter barbas simonim. Now, what's arba simonim? Meaning you could shecht 2 simonim of the mother, and the shechita of the mother will be effective for the vlad, or alternatively, you could shecht 2 simonim of the vlad. And that seems to indicate that the vlad is a separate entity, and you could be matir its basa through shechita of its own 2 simonim. If it was yerech imo, then there should be only 2 simonim, namely the simonim of the mother, that could be matir the vlad through that shechita. And the Ri in Tosis comes to the conclusion that uber yerech imo is a special halacha with regard to treifa. I'm sorry, is a general halacha with the exception of treifa, and treifa is unique. Why? Because treifa depends upon whether the animal could survive. That's called chiyus. And since the uber has its own potential chiyus, therefore, in Hilchas Shchita, we upgrade the status of the 2 simanim of the uber for Shchita. Now the Gemara talks about a tarnagolas shizi, because you have a tarnagolas that has eggs inside of it. Is eno govim mibeit sasa. We do not collect for the damages from the beitza. My taima pirsha v'almahu. The beitza is not considered a part of the body of the tarnagolas, of the hen, but rather it's considered like pirsha. Pirsha means a separate entity and not part of the goof of the tarnagolas. V'yomer Rav, ein shamin lepar b'fnei atzma ulevlad b'fnei atzma. El shamin levlad al gav par. When we evaluate the market price for a para and a market price for the vlad, we do that separately. And we come up to a figure that reflects the para and another figure of the market value of the vlad. So Rava says that that's not the way we're going to do it. But rather, we're going to look at the para together with the vlad as one entity, and we're going to try to figure out what is the estimated value of the para as such as pregnant. She'im iyata omer kain, says Rav, if you don't agree with me, but rather you're going to evaluate the para and the vlad separately, then nimtza shata makrish mazik. You're causing the mazik too much of a hefsek. V'chena tomotzi b'kotei yad avdo shel chavero. A man amputates an arm of an Eved Kanani of his friend. We're not going to do a shuma on the yad itself, but rather we're going to evaluate the Eved if he was sold with a yad or without a yad. V'chena tomotzi b'mazik soda shel chavero. When we want to evaluate the nature of the loss, when somebody damaged a field, let's say, for example, the animal ate up an aruga, one row, we're not going to evaluate the market value of that row, but rather we're going to evaluate the sadeh, how much would it sell for with the aruga, and how much has it now decreased in value because of the mazik eating that aruga. Now, the question that we have to ask here is, what are we worried about? We're worried about the loss of the mazik? Since when do we have such compassion on a mazik who is guilty of not watching his shor and he caused the damage to someone else? Omalei Rav Acha Breder Ravel Rav Ashi v'idinahu likhush mazik. If according to the strict law, the mazik should be paying for the vlad itself, or for the yad itself, or for the aruga itself, then that's what the mazik should pay. Why do we have to be mekil and lenient, and why is our heart going out on behalf of the mazik? And the Gemara answers, Mishum di Omalei, the mazik has a right to claim para mi barta aziktach. my cow was pregnant at the time of the attack, at the time of the loss. And in the case of a shor, my shor was nogeach. So therefore, it's not that the vlad is a separate entity. As we said before in Rava, the vlad is part of the mother, and uber yerech imo is parama barta shaymina loch. Therefore, when you evaluate the market value of the mazik, it should be the para together with the vlad. Kamma says pshita. There's no question that para dechad v'vlad dechad. If one person owns a para and another person owns the vlad. For example, let's say the owner of the para sold to someone the entire para, but not the uber, and then he went ahead and he sold the uber to someone else. So the mazik now has to pay the bala para the amount of money that the bala para lost as a result of the negicha. And then the mazik has to pay the Baal HaVlad, because we said the Vlad was owned by someone else, the value of the Vlad. So that there's no question about it. You cannot say that we evaluate the Vlad together with the Para because they're two owners. Each one is claiming that they should be compensated for a nezek. Pitma, let's say he fattened up the Para. In other words, the para, let's say, was worth X amount, but now he fattened it up. So now the para has a lot more basar, and it went up in value. And now we're going to evaluate the para, and we're going to find out that in the context of this evaluation, the fatness, the extra basar, went down. It was diminished as a result of the attack of the negicha, and now the cow is worth more. Is therefore the mazik has to pay lebala para the exact amount of depreciation of the value of the cow that was victimized by this attack as a result of the fact that he lost shumon, he lost part of his fatness. However, nifcha, let's say we look at the para and we see that its volume has decreased. In other words, it looked much bigger and larger before the attack, and now after the attack it looks smaller. What's my? L'mitz tarech hamazik l'shalim al zeh. Does the mazik have to pay because now the animal looks and is worth less? Well, there's a bala para and there's a bala vlad. The para looked much larger in volume before the attack because it had a vlad inside of it. Is Rav Papa Omer lebala para? The mazik has to pay the hefseid to the bala para because the bala para could have sold his cow at a very high price, and even though the vlad belongs to someone else, but because it looks so much larger, it commands a bigger price. So therefore, the hefseid of this nezek was to the bala para. Rav Acha Breder of Ika Amar Cholkim. We're gonna have to divide up between the bala para and the bala vlad. The tashlum on this hefseid, let's say the para was worth 100, now it's worth 50. So that devaluation of 50 should be split between the bala para and the bala vlad. Vehilchsa Cholkim. And now we're up to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Daf Mem Zayin. Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. We learned in a Mishnah back on Daf Tesam at Beis that if the damaged party had brought his ox into the mazik's rishus and he was damaged there by the shor of the balabayis, then the mazik doesn't have to pay. And our Mishnah is going to address this din in three different scenarios. Number one, somebody brought his chafotzim, he brought his vessels into the chotzer of his friend. B'shus balachotzer, the balachotzer invited him in. Another scenario is shalo b'shus, the balabais did not invite him in. And then we're going to talk about huzku chafotzov al yidei chefto shel balachotzer, that his vessels were destroyed by the vessels of the balachotzer. And finally, when the objects of the balachotzer were damaged by the person who came into his rishus. Hakadar. Kadar is an artisan who creates kederos, meaning pots or large vessels. Shehichnis kederos of lechotzer balabais. He brought his kederos into the chotzer of the balabais. Shalo b'shus. The balachotzer never gave him permission. V'shavra behemto shel balabais potter. If the animal of the balabais destroys these kederos, he doesn't have to pay, because he has a right to claim, well, who invited you to bring your kederos into my chotzer? I'm not responsible for that. But v'im huzka bahen, let's say the balachotzer has a behema, and somehow the kederos destroyed or injured the animal of the balabais. Like, let's say, for example, the balabais slips over. I'm sorry, the animal of the balabais slips over the contents of the kedera, and as a result of slipping, the animal breaks its leg. Is bala kederos chayim? So not only is the bala kederos not capable of claiming damages from the balachotzer, but now, moreover, the balachotzer has the right, if the scenario arises, to claim and sue for damages from the balakaderos. And all this is because the balakaderos had no right to enter into the rishus of the balachotzer. But im hichnes b'rishus, if the balachotzer invited the kadar to bring in his kederos into his rishus, and now the kederos broke as a result of the animal of the balachotzer chayev, he has to pay for that. Because once he gives rishus to his chaver, then implicit is his accepting upon himself a chiyuv shmir and echrayis to make sure that his animal, the balachotzer's animal, would not break the kederos of the kadam. Hichnis perosov lechotzer balabayis shalo b'rishus. Now we have a case of a person who brings his fruits into the courtyard of his friend without permission. V'acholto behemto shel balbayis. The behema, the balbayis, ate these fruits. Potter. The behema does not, who's the balachotz, he doesn't have to pay for that. You entered into my rishus with these peros without permission. But v'im huzku bahen, and if, let's say, the animal of the balachotz slipped on these peros and took a fall and broke its leg, balaperos chayev. The balaperos was responsible and guilty for injuring the animal of the balachotz. V'im hichnis b'rshus, but on the other hand, if the balachotzer gave permission to Ploni Almoni to bring in his peros, so now if the animal of the balachotzer ate up these peros, balachotzer chayav, because since he gave him rishus, then implicit in that rishus was a kabbalas shmira, he took upon himself responsibility to make sure that the balaperos will not be damaged. Now the Mishnah adds another din, hichnis shoro l'chotzer balabayis. Now somebody brings his ox into the courtyard of his friend, shelo b'rshus.